up in.
Excuse me.
Okay, it's something that I want to pick up, and if we have a chance in subsequent meetings, which has to do generally with the idea of Galus and Geula and Churban in a bigger sense, but we're going to talk about it in terms of Shavasar B'Tammuz today. So what I'd like to do is we're going to look at a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah. You know, the things that we look at today, the sources, we mentioned them first in our initial meeting. So maybe they'll be familiar to you. We're going to look at a Mishnah in Tammuz that talks about the 5 things that occurred on Shavasar B'Tammuz. Okay, and we're going to explore, we're going to look at the last pasuk of the whole Chumash, and we're going to try to see what kind of insights we can glean about the Shavasar B'Tammuz, the original Shavasar B'Tammuz by the Egel, and the Shavasar B'Tammuz that you and I are commemorating today. And we're going to look to crack all that open. We're going to look at a Gemara in Avodah Zarah with a very interesting statement from Reish Lakish, a very famous statement. So let's look at the Mishnah. Okay, there's a Mishnah in Tainus. There's a Mishnah in Tainus. The Mishnah says that there's 5 things that happened on Shavasar B'Tammuz. Chamisha dvarim eru es avosenu b'Shavasar B'Tammuz. There are 5 things that happened to our ancestors. So the first one, the earliest one, was by the Egel, and that was at Har Sinai, and that was Nishtabru haluchos. The luchos were broken. Okay. The second thing mentioned in the Mishnah is ubatal hatamid, that the regular daily karbanos of the Beis Hamikdash were discontinued on Shavasar B'Tammuz. This is by the Bayis Rishon. Then it says vehufka ha'ir. On Shavasar B'Tammuz, Bayis Sheni, the walls of Yerushalayim were breached. They were surrounded by the enemy, and essentially they were breached. Actually, by Bayis Rishon, there's a bit of a controversy if that also happened on Shavasar B'Tammuz or it happened on the 7th of Tammuz. But either way, what we're talking about in the Mishnah here is referring to Bayis Sheni. Then the Mishnah says V'saraf apostamos es Torah, that during Bayis Sheni there was some wicked character named Apostamos who publicly burnt a Sefer Torah. And the last item on the list is V'hem mitzelem behechal, that they put in Avodah Zarah, they put a getchka in the Beis Hamikdash. So that's what the Mishnah says, and the Mishnah is giving us a lot of reasons, a lot of things to think about on Shavasar B'Tammuz. But really, since Bayis Sheni, the reason why we commemorate this day as a fast day and a day of tshuva is because of the Hufka Ha'ir, that the city was, the walls of the city were breached on that day. So we do mention these other things, but it seems to be that is why we commemorate, that is the central reason why we commemorate Shavasar B'Tammuz today. Okay, so now I would like to look at the last pasuk of the Chumash, which according to the Mefarshim and according to Chazal is talking about the Shviras HaLuchos. Okay, I just want to note that in this Mishnah we read, the only item on that list that did not occur in the era of Churban, what we call Churban, which means during the times that Am Yisrael were in Eretz Yisrael and they had a mikdash, whether it was Bayis Rishon or Bayis Sheni, the only thing on that list, the only item on that list is the luchos were shattered. Okay, so we're going to look at the last pasuk in the whole Chumash, and it's a very interesting way for Hashem or Moshe Rabbeinu to be Messiah, Sefer Devarim, in the whole Torah, and it's basically talking about the legacy of Moshe Rabbeinu, the last few psukim, and it says, "Ulechol hayara chazaka," and all of the strong hand that was displayed, "Ulechol hamora hagadol," and all the various amazing wonders and miracles, "Asher asa Moshe le'enei kol Yisrael," that Moshe did to the eyes of all of Yisrael. That's the pasuk. Chazal say, Rashi brings down, what's the Yad HaChazak in the beginning of the pasuk? What is this Yad HaChazak, the strong hand that Moshe Rabbeinu had that he displayed? So Rashi says that he was able to receive the luchos with his hands. Chazal say, Rashi says, what's le'enei kol Yisrael, to the eyes of all Yisrael? Very interesting. So there's a Medrash. The Medrash says that there's a pasuk earlier in Devarim where Moshe Rabbeinu is recounting, he's telling over the story of the Egel and how he broke the luchos, and he says, "Ve'eshbereim le'einechem," and I broke them before your eyes. So Rashi brings a Medrash here that it says Le'enei kol Yisrael, to the eyes of all Yisrael. What's that referring to specifically? What was before their eyes? This is referencing when Moshe Rabbeinu said, and I broke the Luchos before their eyes. This is a reference to the breaking of the Luchos. And parenthetically, once we're talking about Chazal say, and we see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was moda to Moshe Rabbeinu, and he said, Yasher koach asher shibarta. Because when Moshe Rabbeinu is told, finally, after he gets he's able to get kapara on behalf of the Jewish people in the aftermath of the Egel, when Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that it's time to come up and receive a second luchos, so it says, Asher shibarta, come get psalacha, right? Come get new luchos, and they will replace the ones Asher shibarta that you broke. And Chazal say, Yasher kochacha Asher shibarta. Wow, Moshe Rabbeinu, you did a gavaldik job. You gave me so much nachas, and you saved history by breaking the luchos. Okay, that's what Chazal say on these words. So this raises a lot of questions. Number one is we want to understand, why is this the way that the Torah closes? Why is this shvach for Moshe Rabbeinu? And why is this the closing note of the Chumash? And why was it, is this a good thing or a bad thing that Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchos? While we're asking questions, even though on this pasuk, even though Rashi says that Pshat and Yada Chazaka means that Moshe Rabbeinu's hands were strong enough to receive the luchos, it seems to be a paraphrase of a Yerushalmi in Tainus, which tells a different story. And that story is that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu pointed out to Moshe Rabbeinu, the second after he gave him the luchos, he says, you know what, they're making an egel downstairs, this is bad news. So the Gemara says, the Yerushalmi says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to take back the luchos from Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu held on to them, and he was misgaber over HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the Yada Chazaka, that instead of Hashem being able to wrestle free the luchos from Moshe's hand, Moshe resisted them and ultimately broke them. So it turns out that according to the Yerushalmi, this last pasuk is telling one complete story, and is talking about the story of, instead of HaKadosh Baruch Hu taking back the luchos in the face of the Egel, now Moshe Rabbeinu is not allowing HaKadosh Baruch Hu to recover the luchos, and instead he smashes them. Okay. The question over here, one could ask, is if Chazal know that Le'enei Kol Yisrael, to the eyes of all the Jewish people, is a reference to the breaking of the luchos, because that's referred to in the pasuk as, and I broke them le'einechem, to your eyes. So simply, if le'enei kol Yisrael is a reference to le'einechem, let the pasuk here end off, let the chumash end off. Ulechol hayad chazaka, ulechol hamor hagadol asher asa Moshe le'einechem, to your eyes, meaning a reference to the previous time that said le'einechem, meaning the breaking of the luchos. Why does, if it indeed means that, why does the pasuk add two extra words? Kol Yisrael. Instead of saying le'einechem, which would be a reference to, and I broke them, ve'eshberin le'einechem, here it says le'einei kol Yisrael. That's a question that we have. Okay, this is how I wanted to start this year. Just to explore a little bit. Okay, Yad Chazaka, the term Yad Chazaka appears in the Chumash in quite a few places beforehand. And I just wanted to note, before we start developing our answer, that there's another interesting, fascinating phenomenon in the previous mentions of Yad Chazaka, and that is that in Parshas Shemos, in Parshas Va'era, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is talking to Moshe Rabbeinu about Geulas Mitzrayim, and he says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that he's going to do things, he characterizes them as a Yad Chazaka. So there's two particular psukim that I want to point out to you here.
לא שומעים אותך. You have to open up your microphone. No.
We can't hear.
You have to open up your microphone, Tova.
Yeah, it's muted. It's muted.
Bottom left-hand corner.
How about now?
Great.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. Thanks.
Correct. Okay.
Okay, so I don't know when the audio went off. I don't know if anybody missed anything, but we're quoting a pasuk in Shemos that says as follows. It says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu that he knows that the king of Mitzrayim is not going to let Am Yisrael leave, velo biyad chazaka, and not with a strong hand. Okay, and Rashi says velo biyad chazaka could be understood two ways. Either it's referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means that normally Paro will not let Am Yisrael leave unless HaKadosh Baruch Hu uses a yad chazaka, meaning because Paro will not let them go, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to use a yad chazaka. And the other pshat Rashi says is that maybe it's referring to Paro himself. The yad chazaka is referring to Paro, and it says that even though, right, because Paro doesn't want you to leave, I'm going to take you out in a way that Paro will not be able to resist, even with a yad chazaka. Meaning Paro himself will not have a yad chazaka to stop me from taking Am Yisrael out of Mitzrayim. Two different pshatim. Meaning yad chazaka means either a tremendous power that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will use to break Paro's resistance, or a yad chazaka means an abortive attempt that Paro will have to assert a yad chazaka. Okay, and there's another pasuk at the end, not so long afterwards, at the end of Parshas Va'era, that says, "Vayomer Adonai el Moshe." God says to Moshe, after Moshe complains bitterly that since he first went to Paro to instruct him to free the Yidden, things only got worse. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ata sira, now you're going to see, Asher es el Paro, what I'm going to do to Paro, ki biyad chazaka yishalchem, for with a strong hand they will be sent, ubiyad chazaka yigashem, and with a strong hand they will be exiled, me'arzo, from his land. So you see here too, Yad Chazaka is mentioned twice, and according to Rashi, the first Yad Chazaka means HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to do all these terrible things to Paro, and meaning against Yad Chazaka, against his will, meaning there's no way that he could resist. Mipnei Yad HaChazaka shetachzik al Paro yishalchem, through Hashem's Yad HaChazaka on Paro they will be sent, and the pasuk says of Yad Chazaka yigashem, and with a strong hand they will be expelled. That's referring to Paro. Al karcham shal Yisrael, against Am Yisrael's will, they'll be expelled through Paro's Yad Chazaka. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is that we see here that Rashi, not that there's ambiguity in these instances of Yad Chazaka, but rather Rashi shows how they could both be referring to either Paro or HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now I'm going to come back to this in order to explain, meaning we're going to come up with some sort of conclusion of what Yad Chazaka means and why it appears in the last pasuk in the Chumash. But before that, we're going to do another stop. Okay. There is an amazing phenomenon, a really fabulous thing that is kedai to note in the Mishnah on Tainus that we mentioned. Of the 5 things mentioned, remember the first one was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Moshe Rabbeinu broke the Luchos. I mean, the fact that the Luchos were broken and all those implications, whatever that means, that happened on Shavuos Tammuz. And then there were 4 things that happened over the course of Churban, whether it was during the period of Bayis Rishon or Bayis Sheni, in the history of Am Yisrael having a Beis Hamikdash and a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that is symbolized by the Beis Hamikdash. There were 4 terrible events that happened. They happened on Shavuos Tammuz, and they all correspond to a particular element in the story of the Egel itself. Allow me to demonstrate. So the first thing that the Mishnah says after the breaking of the Luchos is Batal HaTamid, that the regular karbanos of the Beis Hamikdash were discontinued. This corresponds to the fact that there was a mizbeach. Aaron told the Am Yisrael by the Egel to make a mizbeach and Chag LaHashem Machar. We'll make a party. We'll bring karbanos to HaKadosh Baruch Hu tomorrow. He was trying to stall them, and his intent was that tomorrow, for sure, by then Moshe Rabbeinu would come down, and that would be a yontif upon receiving the Torah. Instead, it says that they used that as a mizbeach for olos, vayalu olos, and they brought olos for the avodah zarah that the Egel had become. So the fact that Batla HaTalmid, Chazal see that as a direct reenactment or a manifesting of that element by the egel of the Mizbeach. The next thing in the list in the Mishnah is v'hufka ha'ir, that the walls of the city were breached. We're going to come back to that. The third thing is v'saraf Torah, right? Apostamas, this terrible Rashi, burnt the Torah. That clearly corresponds to the breaking of the Luchos. And the last thing is Chanan Baer, that they put an avodah zarah in the Beis Hamikdash. That obviously corresponds to the Egel Masecha, the actual idol of the Egel itself. So that leaves us with the question: what is v'hufka ha'ir? When the wall was breached, what element does that correspond to? That this primal element that is present in the story of the Egel. Okay. There are four fasts that we have that correspond to that commemorate the Churban. There's Shavasa Tammuz, but before that there's Asar B'Teves, there's Shavasa Tammuz, there's Tisha B'Av, and there's Tzom Gedalia. And I'm not going to get too much into it now, but it basically, one could look at that as a process, noting each particular fast day is of a particular level of Churban that reaches critical mass that demands of a fast day in and of itself. Meaning there's something about the walls of Yerushalayim being breached that become noteworthy itself in the Churban of it, what that represents, that Am Yisrael has to address that directly, that particular thing in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through a fast day, a time where we have to focus on that and do tshuva for that and see how to bring a tikkun for that, okay? So there's a process, whereas the Churban starts off with an Asar B'Teves and ends the most fatal blow, the most damning thing, that tragedy that secured Churban, that made Churban a reality, ultimately is what we commemorate by after Rosh Hashanah, by Tzom Gedalia. But Shavasa B'Tammuz has a critical moment here, and we want to focus on what that is. And I would say that v'hufka ha'ir represents what v'hufka ha'ir will represent. We're going to discuss in the story of Shavasa B'Tammuz and the Egel is ultimately what Shavasa B'Tammuz represents in a schema of Churban. I'm going to explain to you what I mean. Okay, there is an extra element that we didn't note here yet that occurred by the Egel, and that is that upon the Aser Sadibros, upon HaKadosh Baruch Hu coming to Am Yisrael at Har Sinai, Pasku Zu HaMasam, we say. Chazal say that the original taint of the toxins of the Nachash by the Achila of the Eitz Hadas were dissipated, and ultimately humanity, or Am Yisrael, was restored to that pristine state of Adam Rishon Kodem Achet, where he was immortal. Okay, and the pasuk in Tehillim says, "Ani amarti Elohim atem uvnei elyon kulchem," that HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended within giving the Torah that all of Am Yisrael now would become immortal, and indeed they were. And when Moshe Rabbeinu broke the Luchos, Achen ka'adam tamusun, the pasuk continues in Tehillim, they became mortal again, and now they were subject to death. Okay, so there was some sort of beautiful, pristine immortality, nitzchiyut, that was achieved by the Aser Sadibros, by Matan Torah, that ultimately was totally jeopardized and destroyed by the Shviras HaLuchos. And we're going to say that new reality of mortality is essentially what happened by the walls of the city being breached. I would liken it to this, well, let's just think for a second, imagine that in the long history of Am Yisrael, including the miracles of Chizkiyahu and Sancheiriv, you wake up one morning and you see that the enemy has surrounded the city. And you tell yourself, that's funny. We've been here before. We are secure in our eternal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as manifest in a Beis Hamikdash. We've been through this before. Chizkiyahu, was attacked by Sancheiriv and all the armies. And we went to sleep that night, and we woke up the next day, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu took care of everything. We can be secure in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We can be secure in a magical bubble that we live in, and the security of this special relationship that we have with Hashem that has very real implications on our reality. And that was the default. And now Am Yisrael realizes, they wake up the next day and horror of horrors, they are not in that reality. That is not the level that they're on anymore. That eternity, that immortality, that assured continuity of life with the Beis HaMikdash and what that represented is totally shattered. It's akin to receiving news of the tragedy of receiving news of a terminal illness. Am Yisrael realized in that shock that they were vulnerable, and reality was not what they thought it was, and that was gone, and there's no turning back, and there is an inevitability now to a destruction and an end of that particular way of life. So the mortality that sadly that was given back to Am Yisrael as a result of the shattering of the Luchos is represented by the very real historical occurrence of the Hufka Ayir on Shavasa B'Tammuz. And we're going to say that that is the salient point of all of Shavasa B'Tammuz. We're going to talk about this loss of an immortality, this new reality, this imposition of a new reality of mortality. And we're going to look back at the last pasuk in the Chumash because of that. So what I want to say now is that once again, the four things in the Mishnah correspond to those four elements of the Ega. Okay, so now there's a wild Gemara, very famous Gemara, fascinating, in Avodah Zarah and Daf Hei Amid Aleph, that says like this. Reish Lakish says, "Bo nachzik tov alavosein." We have a tremendous debt of gratitude for our forefathers. Shalom chatu, that if it wasn't for their sin by the Ega, anu lo heinu banu la'olam. Let me see if I got the exact. If our forefathers would not have sinned by the Ega, we would not have come into the world. What does that mean? So the Gemara questions that. The Gemara means, does it mean literally we would not have come into the world? Because he quotes the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Ani amarti Elohim atem." God said, "I wanted the Jewish people by Matan Torah to be immortal, uvnei elyon kolchem, and you would all be angelic." Right? So does Reish Lakish mean to say that we would have been like angels and we would not have had children? That Dar that received the Torah would never have had children, and we never would have come into the world. So the Gemara rejects that. The Gemara explains, the Gemara goes through a whole back and forth and comes out that what Reish Lakish means is, even though if Am Yisrael would have maintained and retained their immortality, they certainly would have had children. And you and I, our generation, would still be here. It would have been ki'ilu, we would not have come into the world, because our being here would have absolutely no significance. It would have no meaning. Why? What does that mean? Okay, so I want to go back for a second, and I want to say that the Yad Chazaka, Rashi can say in Shemos, the Yad Chazaka is either referring to Paro or referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because Yad Chazaka literally means a strong hand. It means imposition. It means an imposition of will or of power or just of a reality. So Yad Chazaka here is a terminology that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is using to mean no matter what kind of resistance there is, this is now the reality, the norm. Okay, so in the context of Yetzias Mitzrayim, if you look in the Psukim over there, where we mentioned, so it makes sense either way to learn, because the Yad Chazaka goes either way. Yad Chazaka in our pasuk at the end of the Chumash means now that Moshe Rabbeinu, there's a new reality here, right? It's the new reality of immortality. I'm sorry, of mortality, the sad reality of mortality, and maybe it means more. What do I mean? Okay, so I think I wanna look at Reish Lakish like this. Reish Lakish is saying that if Am Yisrael would have gotten the Torah and there would have been, without a hitch, everything, the world would have been complete practically, and we would still exist here, but our lives would have absolutely no meaning. There'd be nothing for us to do. So Reish Lakish is saying, hey, because they blew it essentially, now all subsequent generations have what to do. What does that mean, we have what to do? So on the surface, that means, Pasha, that achievement is always much more meaningful than givens, right? Meaning that which you achieve is much more meaningful, and it's so much more real than that which you have that was given to you. So Reish Lakish is going to say, anything that we achieve in a world of mortality, it's a great thing. We should be thankful. Meaning our avos that would have received the Torah, everything would have been perfect. There would have been no need. But now we live in a messed up world, so everything we do is meaningful. We have to explain what that is. Okay, what that means. But I think in order to explain, we have to understand. Well, I'll say it like this. This is something that okay. So the difference between achievement and being given, okay, is another way of saying how Chazal note the difference between the first luchos and the second luchos. If we would have been connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the first luchos, we would have had a perfect, complete knowledge of the Rebbeinu Shalom, of what he wants for us to do, and there would have been, that's it, we would have been perfect beings. Because our connection to the Luchot Shniyos, our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the Luchot Shniyos, and the Luchot Shniyos are characterized as Pesol Lecha. Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that Moshe Rabbeinu this time he has to provide the luchos for Hashem to write the Torah on. That our connection to Hashem is through our efforts. That means that whereas the first luchos would have resulted in our perfect understanding, our total grasp of the Torah internally, we would not have to learn Torah. We would not be struggle intellectually with understanding the Torah, memorizing the Torah, or none of that would happen. It would all been a complete and total package. Through our connection to Hashem, through the Luchot Shniyos, we actually have to struggle, and to the degree that we put in, that's what we get. It's characterized by Psal Lecha, carve for yourself, okay? So the trade-off is, we do not have all the perfect excellence that we would have had before, but everything we do have is a result of our struggle and our achievement, so that it's real and it's a part of us. And anything that does exist in the world is because of us. So in a world, in a history of a creation where HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to partner with with Am Yisrael or with man, anything ultimately that is a result of mankind, that's achieving it is so much more meaningful both to Hashem and to mankind than if Hashem would have given it to us. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us everything at Har Sinai, and that would have been the apex of human history, there would be nowhere to go. So you and I would be living a life in the context of that and benefiting from that, but our lives itself would have no meaning. We would have no input and no way at all to contribute. So in a way, because that is no longer the reality, anything that is indeed achieved towards that will be a result of subsequent generations, which means that we are empowered. So this is very important to know. This whole story, while we're in Galus and we have these fast days and we have these tzomos, it's very, very important to understand that as a generation we came in, reality is not the way it is because of us. We are not the ones that were there by the Egel, and we're not the ones that were there by Churban, by Rishon or Sheni, and yet we're meant to deal with it. We're told that this is a result of us. And we're supposed to feel about it, feel bad about it, maybe feel responsible. And the question is why? Because we didn't do it. So I think that the important thing here is that we came into a world where the conditions are the way they are as a result of those people that were there at the time. And if we don't do anything about it, the next generation, it will have been, not because it happened historically, but because we didn't do anything about it, just like we're coming into this story because nobody did anything about it a generation before, which means that we have to understand that we're actually empowered to change it. So we come into a world where we are people after Adam Rishon ate from the Eitz Hadas. We have a Yetzer Hara inside of us, and we come into a world after a shattering of the Luchos, or after mortality, meaning all these things that the conditions that made the world less than perfect what it is, we are a product of that. And yet we're told to identify with that as if it is our responsibility. And that means that we have the opportunity to do something about it, which means that somehow through an achievement, ultimately we can get to that place that we were meant to be by Har Sinai, before the Egel, just by working towards it. This is going to be a massive theme that hopefully that I want to explore in subsequent meetings. This is really the story of getting kicked out of Gan Eden. This is the story of the Meraglim. This is that everything that Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give man and that he wanted to be in creation, there seems to be a setup that resulted in a breakdown. And ultimately that's empowering us to achieve it so that we do get there, but it's a result of creation's actions, of humanity. It's a result of Am Yisrael, and not because Kadosh Baruch Hu gave it to us. Hopefully we'll be able to explore that. Also, by the way, there are direct parallels. I don't know if it's occurred to anybody yet, but the story that we have to talk about the breaking of the Luchos, how that functions. But essentially, once Adam HaRishon ate from the Eitz HaDaas, Kadosh Baruch Hu said, we got to get him out of Gan Eden before he eats from the Eitz HaChaim and he lives forever. Because if he would have eaten from the Eitz HaChaim, he would have lived forever in the state of somebody who ate from the Eitz HaDaas. And there would have been no room to fix anything, because now he would have been an immortal, he would have been transformed into an immortal creature in a corrupted form of somebody ate from the Eitz HaDaas. But now that we kick him out of Gan Eden, so to speak, humanity now can fix himself and get back in and then eat from the Eitz HaChaim. So if Moshe Rabbeinu would have given us the Luchos, if we would have gotten the Luchos after the Egel, there are different ways to look at it, but one could say that in Moshe Rabbeinu not allowing HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take it back from him, he basically precluded Hashem from taking back the Luchos, which would have been essentially a divorce. It would have called the whole thing off. So Moshe Rabbeinu didn't let him take it back, but at the same time, he did not give it to Am Yisrael in the state after the Egel. They never received it, because that would have made them then subject to all kinds of things. There would have been no tikkun for that either. So one of the ways of understanding kind of what happened was the brilliance of Moshe Rabbeinu is that he didn't allow HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take back the Luchos, but he shatters them so that they are now in our possession, they're broken. They were broken in our domain, which means that if we can do tshuva and fix this whole thing of the Egel, then we haven't voided the relationship. Hashem can now restore those Luchos. Meaning we didn't, he salvaged the relationship that it wasn't voided, and yet smashed the Luchos so that we wouldn't be stuck in that reality, and we would be able to fix things and ultimately achieve what Hashem intended for us by the first Luchos. Okay, so it turns out then that the mortality of the new reality of a Shavasar B'Tammuz is actually tremendous empowerment. That's what Reish Lakish is saying. Reish Lakish is saying that in a world of breakdown, of sin, of the Egel, and of mortality, essentially you and I have what to do, because we can contribute to a world, not just a world that's messed up, we can make it better, but we can take steps forward to the ultimate tikkun. And that, so that's, I want to use that basically to answer the question that we asked, why the pasuk ends off with Le'enei Kol Yisrael and not Le'enei Chet. What do I mean? Now, let's look at the pasuk. The pasuk says, the pasuk at the end of the Chumash, it says, what is the great achievement of Moshe Rabbeinu? Why are we ending the whole Chumash with this story? That Moshe Rabbeinu salvaged what would have been an absolute failure by Matan Torah, and he salvaged that, and he turned that into something that wasn't just Einei Chem, the door of Matan Torah, but Le'enei Kol Yisrael. Now there is relevance, because Moshe Rabbeinu, what he did by the Yad HaChazaka, he broke the Luchos in the imposition of a mortality that was foisted upon us because of the Chet HaEgel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe Rabbeinu now salvaged that and turned that into a story that is malava us to all of Am Yisrael throughout the Doros. Le'enei Kol Yisrael. Now, every subsequent generation of Am Yisrael has the ability now to work towards the completion and achievement of what Hashem initially intended. And that was the brilliance of Moshe Rabbeinu shattering the Luchos, so that the Yad HaChazaka was not just the Yad HaChazaka of Hashem, that now after the Egel, we are mortal, but it was the Yad HaChazaka of Moshe Rabbeinu forcing the issue. And one could argue that Yad HaChazaka also is the modus operandi by which we do this. Meaning, if we come into a world where now the context is that our reality is subject to all these limitations. We have Chet and we have Yetzer Hara, and the world is so messed up over steady blow after blow historically of Hidarderut and Yerida Sadaras and all the bad things that we've done, in the interim. So how do we expect anything to get better? So absolutely we are empowered to make things better, but we're not limited by reality, we're limited by the nature. Meaning through employing yad chazaka on ourselves, by forcing ourselves to step up, we can overcome actually those limitations of that yad chazaka, and ultimately we can achieve mamish a luchos rishonos, a bayis shlishi, and we can get to a point spiritually where HaKadosh Baruch Hu can reinvest in us an immortality. So that's pretty much my message for today. So once again, just to recap before I take questions, Shavasar B'Tammuz is the introduction of mortality. The Shiras Aluchos is the introduction of mortality. And yet the Torah, why is the Chumash end like that? Because in a way that is Moshe Rabbeinu's parting message and greatest achievement. Instead of having a Matan Torah and a Luchos Rishonos, the way it would have looked at by Har Sinai, we're given a Chumash, which is supposed to be malava us in a process throughout the Doros. So the Chumash is not what Hashem intended by Matan Torah. So the breaking of the Luchos results in a Chumash, and the point of the Chumash is that we have this work to do that we can achieve le'enei kol Yisrael. Okay, so Shavasar B'Tammuz is the introduction of this terrible horror and tragedy and despair of the realization that Am Yisrael is not in their Beis Hamikdash, that whole period of time, that they can't take for granted anymore. That's over. Okay, that's the death of that period and that era and that kind of connection that Am Yisrael had with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is, the roots of that stem from the mortality that was foisted upon us on the heels of the Shiras Aluchos. And the pasuk at the end of the Torah seems to characterize all this as a good thing. And we're understanding that through Reish Lakish. Okay, Reish Lakish says that we actually have to be grateful. There is a silver lining in Shavasar B'Tammuz because that is a restatement of reality that allows us now to do something. I just want to end, I'm just going to restate the mashal one more time before I take questions. But let's say you have a married couple. You have two married couples, and they've both been married for 35 years. One couple, they were very, very fine people. They were young, but they were fine. They were developed, and they had good midos, and they were able to come together without any transition and live a life together, a partner, without any struggle, without any conflict. Mamish, it was like from the first moment, things were smooth and they were together and they were able to raise a family and everything's fine. 35 years and everything's fine. And their neighbors down the road, anything that could have gone wrong, short of anything terrible that would have jeopardized the entire marriage, did go wrong. And they've struggled from the beginning with all kinds of struggles interpersonally with themselves. And yet they've managed at 35 years in to actually have a shalom bayis and a connection and a personal understanding and a friendship and a closeness and a partnership that is a result of overcoming, being forced to overcome and working and creating tools and growing in adversity of those issues that they faced when they came together. So now, even if we look on the outside and we look at them and they become people already that are indescribable, both couples, they're indistinguishable, and they look on the surface like they maintain the same level of shalom bayis and joy in their union, the truth is that for the first couple that never ever struggled, that's just how it is. That was a matana. They are a matana that they receive from Hashem. Their marriage is a matana. And the fact that their marriage is what it is does not say anything, let alone they have never developed any tools to overcome conflict. They wouldn't be able to face conflict. They cannot impart their children with any wisdom or any experience of how to overcome things, meaning, thank God that the situation is great and they get to enjoy it all. But it is so much more real for the second couple because it is achieved, and therefore it is far more meaningful. It is more real to them. It is more to be appreciated, and they have very real things because of that journey that actually enhances the world and makes the world a better place and makes them richer to give. So essentially, I want to use that kind of metaphor to talk about, to describe really what we're talking about as what it would have been Matan Torah without the Egel and the Shiras Aluchos versus what is possible now for history, for Le'enei Kol Yisrael, till the ultimate tikkun, when we achieve all these things, Be'ezrat Hashem, B'mehir v'yameinu. Okay, I think I'm open to questions now. Going once? Going twice? Okay, any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So what's the difference between if we had gotten those Luchot right away, and we hadn't had the Egel, and what we're going for when we're saying Olam Haba. Does
Okay.
that mean Olam Haba is going to be boring and not worthwhile?
Hayom la'asotam u'lamachar lekabel stara. So this way, when we finally get to the finish line, there will be nothing to do. But every single person throughout history who contributed will have a place in that finish line. If the alternative would have been, history would have effectively ended then, and all the neshamas that were in Adam Rishon that were meant to have bodies and to live historically, you and I, we would still be here with absolutely nothing to do. And it would have been like our lives wouldn't have mattered at all, because first of all, there would be no possibility to do an Avera. And even if there was, we wouldn't do the Avera. And there would be no schar for a mitzvah. And there would be nothing in the history of the creation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that would have been added by you and our being. And that whole playing field is radically changed by the fact that that Matan Torah was a disaster. Because Matan Torah was a disaster, you and I have a very real possibility to contribute to the world. Yes, la'asid lavo, when the tikkun is finally achieved, the goal is not to do anything anymore, but for all of us to reap and enjoy actually the benefits of that achieved relationship. That's how I would say it.
So
You don't like that? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You seem dissatisfied.
I am.
Okay.
I think you don't know what it would have been. You just think there'd be nothing to do because we didn't get that path. I don't think that it would be something that was unsatisfying if it had been designed by Hashem for us. I don't know what it would have been either, but I don't think it would have been a lack of meaningfulness. It would just be a whole different dimension of meaningfulness.
Well,
that's my guess.
I'm going to give you a sneak peek. If that's how you feel, you're going to be very, very, very disappointed and dissatisfied with all the future things I have to say about Churban, because really, ultimately, what I would like to demonstrate in subsequent meetings is that the plan B is always the secret plan A, and it's built into creation that all the great moments in history that we say there was a breakdown, it was actually a setup, because Hashem ultimately wants you to achieve, because otherwise it would have had absolutely no meaning. And don't be fooled by the setup that Hashem actually wanted it that way. That's going to be my premise that I will develop later on. And from your point of view, you'll be very, very unhappy. But I still think that if you gave me a chance, I might be able to convince you. So that's for later. Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
I've been having a hard time with the fact that what are we celebrating on Shavuos? Like you said, the luchos that we got on Shavuos are not the luchos that we want, and we want the luchos that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote with and we got those on Yom Kippur. And at the end of the day, Yom Kippur seems to be like the time. And even if you want to go further, really Purim. That's really the biggest day of the year.
So what are the days that we celebrate Matan Torah? We celebrate Simchas Torah, we celebrate Yom Kippur, and we celebrate Purim, right? Kabbalas Torah was not achieved till 1,000 years after Matan Torah by Kimu v'Kiblu. Absolutely. Everything you're saying is 100%. And therefore you're asking, what is the import? What was the ultimate import, the lasting import of Ma'amad Har Sinai that we do celebrate on Shavuos? That's your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I would say, and this is really a discussion for Shavuos, but every year I talk about this. Shavuos has nothing really to do, if you look at the psukim, of Matan Torah. And in fact, it's not necessarily even on the same day, because we're not sure if it happened on Vav Sivan or Zayin Sivan. And if you look everywhere in the Chumash that it says to keep Shavuos, it never links it to Matan Torah. And Chazal say Dafka Matan Torah has never said a date in the Chumash, because the Chol Yom Yu Beinecha Kechadoshim, that you have to treat the giving of the Torah as if it's every day. So Shavuos, the fact that it's Zman Matan Torah Seinu, we have to understand what that means. But I mean, it's not Shavuos now, I'm not going to get into it, but I'll tell you the element that we do celebrate on Shavuos, if Shavuos is a holiday at all that commemorates Matan Torah, it's that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bechlal gave us a Torah. That means that Hashem chose, oh, by the way, I'm sorry, it's not really the Torah, it's Ma'amad Har Sinai. And it's the idea of Anochi, of Ana Nafsha Kesivna Yahavis. on Shavuos, we celebrate the fact that our lives are elevated by the fact that we have a Torah that dictates what to do in a physical world. That everything that we do in a physical world, my non-Jewish neighbor next door, he ties his shoes. And when I tie my shoes, I follow Shulchan Aruch, and somehow I'm connecting to Hashem through tying my shoes. That's really the aspect of Matan Torah that we celebrate on Shavuos. If you want to explore this more, we could do this at another time. Okay, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. At least my question is a question.
It's absolutely, yes, and there's a real answer to your question. I appreciate it. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So essentially you're saying the struggle is better than perfection.
The struggle is what makes achievement meaningful, as opposed to being given. Either meaning being given something or achieving something is all the difference in the world, and Hashem prefers that we achieve it, because that's what makes our lives meaningful. To have something doesn't matter. Life is not about what you have or you don't have. It's about why you have what you have or you don't have.
It's about why, or it's how you got to what you
exactly have. Why do I have what I have? What is the result? Why do I have what I have, or why do I not have? Is it meaning that's something I can either take responsibility for or be proud of? What I have or what I don't have, that's the cards I dealt with. That has nothing to do with me. That just sets the context of my life. Ultimately, I'm not going to be, there are different reasons why a person would want to have something, but mostly we want to have something because it takes care of a problem. Because if we wouldn't have it, it would be a problem, right? Mm-hmm. So you could go through life thinking, I need to have certain things. I need to be married. I should have a good marriage. I need to have kids. I didn't say that the world should be structured that way. I should have good kids, and they should be healthy, and they should be happy. So those are all the things I want to have. But whether I have them or not doesn't make my life meaningful. It's what happens when I don't have it. Or do I have it because of this story that I grew through it and I changed something, and I can say that it was meaningful, this pursuit and this narrative, or not. So all the things that you're given in life is not what gives your life meaning. That's I think.
So do we really want Yemos HaMashiach? Do we want to get to that state of this perfect world?
Well, it's not going to happen until we do. You have plenty of time. You can go on forever. We can go on for. We're supposed to only last 6,000 years before Hashem forces the issue. But I'm just saying, theoretically, if Hashem wasn't on a timetable, if it was up to us, it could be 1 billion years, and you could take your time. It would be chaval. But there's something very, very real about our input. And there's no replacement for it. And ultimately, that's the tragedy of 6,000 years. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu just makes it happen, we will have blown it, because we could be enjoying Olam Haba as a result of our actions.
I think that it's important that we not be given everything. However, that's the chesed, but the Gevurah is our actions to get it. But if we don't ever meet in the middle, where Tiferes is and where Yesod is, we really haven't. It's not worth anything. We are ascribing meaning to it as men, but we should be doing it from Hashem's perspective. That's the goal, is to be in tandem with Hashem. If Hashem decides he wants to give us something, then we need to hold back a little on our ego as far as having to achieve it. It has to meet in the middle line. It can't be all chesed and it can't be all gevurah. It has to be balanced. And then it's like having a vessel and having water, but it's not complete until we get to drink the water in the middle, where it meets in the middle.
Okay, so I am sympathetic to what you're saying, and I'm just going to end off with just these 2 points in what you're saying. There is a time that it's appropriate, which is the opposite, where we look at, there are moments of perspective where it's opposite, where it is fitting and worthy for us to say that everything, even the things that we've done through our blood, sweat, and tears, is only a gift from Shammai. That's also a valid perspective, right? Meaning, how could the fact that I have conscience, all the things I take for granted about myself, they're not me, that's Hashem. My ability to move my pinky, just because I thought so, doesn't mean that the pinky will move. And just the fact that I had a thought, meaning there's no limit to what level of self-awareness that you can be grateful that it's all really Hashem. But that's not the valuable perspective here in our lesson today. But the other point I wanted to make is that what you're talking about is the whole issue, the way the Mekubalim and really Chazal see the issue of Gan Eden. Why would Adam Rishon sin? It's called Na'ama de Chisufa, the bread of shame. Meaning Hashem made man in a way that he can't be sovel, being given everything, because it's not him. So he has to somehow inject himself in things and mess things up because it's not going to be worthwhile to him. He's not happy with what's given to him. He needs to partner. But from Hashem's perspective also, Hashem doesn't want a puppet show. He wants the beauty and the joy of creation is being in a partnership where he can't predict what we're going to do and make us do it because he wants it. He wants us to be a partner. So those are the fault lines that the balance that you're talking about has to settle along those in that field. And with that, I'm going to wish everyone a good fast and a meaningful one.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for organizing.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much. That was awesome.
Thank
Crazy.
you.
Some
Thank
cults
you.
are crazy. Got a meditating on that for years now.